Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Good afternoon. Independent chemical weapons scientists have confirmed that military-grade Novichok was used in the attempted murder of the former Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. The government has called an emergency meeting with the global watchdog, the OPCW, next week. It comes as the Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson said there was no doubt that Russia was behind the attack and the Kremlin must give answers. Well, he said there can be no doubt what was used and there remains no alternative explanation about who was responsible. Only Russia has the means, motive and record. In the interest of transparency, and because unlike the Russians, we have nothing to hide, we have asked the OPCW to publish the executive summary for all to see and to circulate the full report to all state parties of the OPCW, including Russia. We will now work tirelessly with our partners to help stamp out the grotesque use of weapons of this kind, and we have called a session of the OPCW Executive Council next Wednesday to discuss next steps. The Kremlin must give answers. Well, let's get the latest now with Sky's crime correspondent Martin Brunt, who's in Salisbury. And Martin, that comes from Boris Johnson saying that this was undoubtedly Russia, but the OPCW didn't say that this was Russian, was it? Did they?
The weapons inspector's report didn't say that, but I think it's widely acknowledged that it wasn't the inspector's job to identify the source of the Novichok. We were told late last night that the report would be published, at least in its summary form, midday today. And I think even then it seemed clear that it was going to confirm the government's Porton-Down scientists' own view that this was Novichok, and that's exactly what it says in that executive summary that was published a couple of hours ago. The full report, of course, has gone to all signatories to the Chemical Weapons Convention, and that includes Russia. So we haven't seen everything. And the summary report doesn't name Novichok, but we're told that the full report clearly does. And it also says that it was of high purity. It also says that the 4 labs that were used to test the various samples that were collected here from some of the sites where evidence of Novichok was found, and from the blood samples taken from Mr. Skripal and his daughter, and the police officer who was contaminated as well, all confirm what the Porton-Down scientists said a couple of weeks ago, that it was indeed Novichok. OK. Martin, thanks a lot. Well, let's get reaction from Russia now with Sky's Lisa Holland. She's in Moscow. So, widely accepted, Lisa, that it was Russia behind the attack, despite the OPCW not actually mentioning them. Is that something Russia is likely to accept?
No, things are not really going to change from the Russian perspective. They've made their position clear. They say that there has not been made public any evidence which specifically implicates the Russians. They will also point to the fact that this OPCW report does not point the finger at the Russians either. And they'll skip over the fact that the OPCW's brief was not to say who did it, but to say what the nerve agent was. I think as far as the Russians are concerned, their deputy industry minister has been talking today, and we are expecting the foreign ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova, who has just begun talking in Moscow. She may say something, but they've left it to the industry minister deputy to remind people of what their argument is in all of this. And they say that Russia did not have a Novichok program, has never had a Novichok program. And as Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, made clear a week or so ago, they say that some 20 or so countries had the know-how to develop Novichok.
OK, thank you so much. I just want to, thanks, Lisa. I just want to bring you some breaking news now. Reuters news agency is saying that Britain has requested a UN Security Council meeting next week on the chemical weapons watchdog report, that OPCW report that Martin and Lisa were talking about on the Salisbury poisoning. That's all we have at the moment, but we'll keep you up to date with that. So Britain requesting a UN Security Council meeting on that report. Let's go straight back to Russia, where the foreign ministry spokesperson is talking about the Salisbury spy poisoning case. Let's have a listen to what she's got to say.
This case is not a standalone case. At that time, at least, we saw some images of Litvinenko, at least his picture. As for Skripals, until now, only months has passed, nobody saw them. There is no chance to contact them somehow, neither through media or Russian channels, even though Russia sent a lot of notes and was always said no. Well, nevertheless, Russia is not standing aside. If London doesn't want to listen to our request to be involved in the investigation, at least the scale and incoherence of the comments by the authorities and a lot of leakages, stupid leakages, we have to somehow participate in this case. There are no doubts that everything that is going on there is badly planned and strangely realized from the point of view of logic and logistics, a provocation against the Russian Federation. New strategy of information war was fully tested on this case. Just pay attention to the lack of comments of the official authorities representing investigative bodies of this case. It was explained by the fact that the investigation is classified because of the interests of national security of the state. How come that almost every day in the mass media of the Great Britain there are different types of information with the references on sources close to the victims? It seems that this is not so secret, the case. Or maybe there are people working in the special services who are not aware very well of the state secrecy. I know that they know perfectly well how to maintain secrecy. We know that they classify the information for a long time and do it well. We have all the grounds to come back to our first idea that those leakages that we noticed and that are happening now are well planned. And in general, despite the number of leakages in the mass media, nobody commented on them. And this is another characteristic feature of this case. It's a kind of mark of this case. A lot of leakages and fakes, supposedly from the authorities. So, in the end, within this case of development of this, in this case, it seems to be that we could say that it is kind of unprofessional behavior, but it's not true. We know perfectly well how the British work in the sphere of information. We saw a lot of clear and emotional statements by Theresa May in the Parliament, the statements made by Boris Johnson, including in mass media, also during briefings, press conferences of the investigative authorities who had to clear a lot of discrepancies and leakages during this case in the press, and there were no explanations because there were no such briefings because it was not serving their interests for London. it was too complicated for them. So the number of versions of what had happened according to the British media, and the number is impressive. On March 5, the Salisbury Journal informed that emergency service think that that was fentanyl, the toxic agent, and restaurant Zizi confirmed this. Telegraph said the same. Then the comment was deleted. Nevertheless, it was kept in cache of Google. What kind of data was published there? Why they decided to delete it? On March 6, nothing is known. Boris Johnson says in the parliament that country will strictly respond to any involvement of Russia into this incident. So they took the decision. They announced it on March 7 on Scotland Yard, announced that Sergei and Yulia Skripal were poisoned by nerve gas, and the police doesn't mention what type of toxic agent was used. And Daily Star published that probably it was done by a killer. March 8, a Metro publication say that food was poisoned. Then March 10, they said that the restaurant was poisoned, restaurant Zizi, and they proposed to clean their stuff. The recommendation is published on the webpage of the government of Great Britain, and they mentioned that they are talking about the poisoning of the most dangerous agent, and the authorities, after 6 days, just say to clean their clothes. Daily Mail, the same day, informs that the flowers left on the cemetery could also be poisoned. March 11, new version by Express magazine. The delivery was poisoned, received through the courier service. March 12, Theresa May said that it was combat nerve gas used for poisoning of the victims. And then now it's clear that Skripal and his daughter were poisoned by nerve gas developed in Russia. It's type Novichok, based on positive identification of this chemical agent imported down, and considering that Russia produced this agent before and still has the possibility to produce it, as well as considering previous financed by Russia killings, and according to our evaluation that Russia has the motive for this. The government decided that Russia highly probably used it against Sergei and Yulia Skripal, and there is a clear explanation of what happened. Either it is a direct action of the Russian Federation against our country, or the Russian Federation lost control over this dangerous nerve toxic agent, and it got into the third hands. And March 13, Mail Online provides new version of the events. The substance was put on the handle of the car. March 14, Theresa May officially accuses Russia in the attempt to kill Skripal's permanent representative of the Great Britain at the UN, John Allen, also said that Great Britain has no option just to consider Russia responsible for this. March 15, Guardian said that they have the evidence of overwhelming the evidence of participation of Russia in poisoning of Skripal, but he didn't mention which exactly evidence is. The same day, Telegraph publishes the article saying that the agent used for poisoning of Skripal was in his daughter's suitcase. According to the magazine, the toxin was in her suitcase. Some clothes had some marks of the agent or cosmetics.
Okay, well, that's Maria Zakharova. She's the Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson, and she's talking about the Salisbury spy poisoning case. Russia, of course, continuing to deny involvement. Ms. Zakharova, they're reading a timeline of press reports around that poisoning. We're going to leave it there.
International chemical weapons inspectors have confirmed the UK's assessment of the nerve agent used against a former Russian spy and his daughter in Salisbury. The government has said it was Novichok, a poison developed in the Soviet era, and that the Russian state must have been behind last month's attack. Moscow has denied any involvement and said today's report is part of an operation to discredit Russia. Our security correspondent Frank Gardner reports.
Investigating the nerve agent attack in Salisbury has turned into an international task. After Britain published its findings last month and blamed Russia, it asked this global chemical watchdog, the OPCW, for a second opinion. Today, it published its report. It says the results of the analysis by the OPCW-designated laboratories confirm the findings of the UK relating to the identity of the toxic chemical that was used in Salisbury and severely injured 3 people. Britain's chemical defence establishment at Porton Down quickly identified the nerve agent as a Novichok. Today's report doesn't mention that word, but a second classified OPCW report does identify the name and structure of the poison.
By itself, this is not going to be determinative, but if you look at the contextual facts of what we know about Novichoks, they were invented by Russia largely to avoid verification under the Chemical Weapons Convention.
Russia denies any responsibility for the attack. Today, its foreign ministry spokeswoman dismissed the report as being part of an operation to discredit Russia. Yulia Skripal is now in hiding somewhere in Britain. Russia has suggested she's being held against her will. Her father is still in hospital. Next week, the OPCW Executive Council is due to discuss the report into the poisoning and Russia's alleged violations of the Chemical Weapons Convention. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
Now to chemical weapons used rather closer to home. Independent inspectors have confirmed that the UK's analysis of the type of nerve agent used on the Skripals in Salisbury. The Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons did not name the chemical used as Novichok or point the finger at any country for using it. Our Home Affairs correspondent Andy Davis is in Salisbury for us. Andy.
Matt, after the former spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia were poisoned here in Salisbury, the government didn't just send in their scientists to investigate. They invited in a body called the OPCW. That's the International Chemical Weapons Watchdog. And their scientists sent off for independent analysis samples from possible contamination sites. Mr. Skripal's front door, for instance, you'd imagine, because that's where the police said that the highest concentration of nerve agent was found. They also took blood samples from the Skripals, and today from their headquarters in The Hague, they issued a summary of their findings, which says basically, when the UK claims that the nerve agent Novichok was used here, they're right.
Andy, so does this mean that the Russians were behind it?
Well, it means that Novichok was used. It wasn't their role to establish the source of this chemical, merely the type of it. It's interesting that they note that it was of a high purity, and of course that's allowed the British government to come in and say, well, of course, this backs up our claim that only the Russians had the means, the method and the record to carry this out. Equally predictable, perhaps, has been the Russian response, which is crudely, unless you show us the evidence, you give us access to the evidence, we don't believe you.
Russia won't trust any conclusions in the Skripal case until Russian experts have been given access to the relevant materials given to the OPCW experts and all the information London has on this incident.
So, Andy, where does this go next?
Well, in terms of diplomatic relations, even further in the direction of the gutter, I suppose. For instance, Julia Skripal issued a statement through Scotland Yard last night in which she said she didn't feel strong enough yet to speak to the media, but she hoped to one day. And then you get the Russian embassy countering that by saying that they doubt very much that this was actually her statement. Another illustration, if one was needed, of just how bad this has got. Longer term, there will be a meeting of the OPCW in The Hague next week. What other member states there have to say about this latest development could be fascinating.
Andy Davis in Salisbury, thank you very much indeed.
It would be wrong to draw parallels between events in Syria and in Salisbury, scene of the poisoning of Sergei and Yulia Skripal. But scientists from the same chemical weapons monitoring group who are in Syria, checking the substances used in the gas attack in Syria, have given their verdict on what was used against the Skripals. The group based in the Netherlands has confirmed the findings of UK scientists without actually naming the nerve agent as Novichok.
Called in to independently verify the work of these British investigators, the weapons inspectors reached the same conclusions. Test results on evidence they gathered in Salisbury from around the city and from blood samples taken from Sergei Skripal, his daughter Yulia and Detective Sergeant Nick Bailey were precisely what the government wanted to hear. The report says the results confirm the findings of the United Kingdom relating to the identity of the toxic chemical that was used in Salisbury and severely injured 3 people. The team notes that the toxic chemical was of high purity. Scientists here at the OPCW did not say where the weapon was manufactured and did not use its name, Novichok, in their reports. Their job, in essence, was simply to identify the chemicals and not to speculate on responsibility. That is the job of the politicians, who still maintain Russia are the prime suspect. And as outlined at the United Nations, they will be shown the scientific evidence.
This was a military-grade nerve agent of high purity. We have asked them to circulate the full report to all states parties, and they will do that, and that will include Russia.
Moscow and their various embassies were uncharacteristically quiet today. They are already analysing the confidential report, which they told ITV News is interesting. Perhaps because, as experts point out, it doesn't apportion blame.
We have a confirmation of the agent and we have some circumstantial evidence. What we don't have at this stage is something that links it absolutely beyond any doubt to a particular laboratory, to a particular way of synthesis, to a scientific research group or something like that. A little bit like a situation where we have a smoking gun, we have a lot of circumstantial evidence, we're just missing the fingerprint to make the final proof.
Despite that omission, the science combined with intelligence leads to one place, according to the head of GCHQ.
It demonstrates how reckless Russia is prepared to be, how little the Kremlin cares for the international rules-based order, how comfortable they are at putting ordinary lives at risk.
Another emergency meeting on the Salisbury attack will be held here next week. Russia will no doubt be told that only they have the means, motive and record to have used this chemical weapon. Rupert Evelyn, News at 10 in The Hague.